gets complicated.
When I say that 2020 has been a bizarre year, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. I mean, we've heard it in the previous two speeches, right? You know, so much of what we knew as normal has been tested and stretched, and even in some cases, like completely upended. You know, we had our routines. We dropped off our kids, we went to work, we went to the movies and concerts and sporting events. And then all of a sudden we didn't. There was no more normal. Our vernacular changed. Yeah, you know, all of a sudden we were all having to pivot or be fluid or navigate this uncharted territory. It was one of my favorites. And, you know, I have to admit, it's not actually been all that bad. I have rarely put gas in my car. I wear pants with elastic bands to work every day, which is amazing. I love being in Zoom meetings where you see people's cats' tails just slowly go across the screen. That's one of my favorites. And I've found ways to socialize with people online, being able to connect with them. And it's awesome because the drinks are cheaper. So all of these parts of the pandemic, I absolutely have loved and taken in. But the pandemic has also caused chaos and destruction, and it's left us in its wake. Those routines, those things that helped us have stability, they were gone. And this can be challenging in just the day-to-day, but there are moments in our life where we need a sense of normalcy. And when that happens, that loss of control can feel exponential. And that's where I was earlier this year. So let me take you back. In the beginning of the year, my mom, she had some health complications, and she ended up actually moving from her hometown in Southwest Kansas, Garden City, to go to Oklahoma City and be closer to my sister. And she went into a care facility. And on March 13th, that facility went on lockdown. No one in, no one out. But a couple weeks later, on February 29th, my dad, he had a heart attack. And he had surgery, had a stent in, and he was stabilized. And then his health took a turn. And he ended up in the hospital. And on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 2020, I got a call from my mom. And she said, "I just got off the phone with the hospital. He's gone." My dad had died. And in that situation, I wept. If you've experienced this before, you know that the sense of loss and permanency, it can be overwhelming. But in typical times, in these moments, you know what to do. You know what to expect. You know that you're going to gather with family. You know that there are going to be people who come over and give you meals and sit with you. You know that there's going to be a service and you're going to be able to say your goodbyes. But in March 2020, those weren't an option. And I didn't know what to do. I did go back to Garden City to make a few arrangements. We had my dad's body cremated, but we didn't know when we would be able to have a service. And so I was at the funeral home, and you know, having to ask a question that I never thought in my wildest dreams I would have to ask. I had to ask the funeral director, is there any charge for storing his ashes here for an unknown amount of time? Because, you know, I mean, it would be very convenient to store his ashes there, but I wasn't going to about to pay a premium for it. And thankfully there wasn't. And, you know, everything was up in the air. You know, we had no routine. We thought that maybe we would be able to have a service in May, perhaps June. But May came, June came, and it wasn't going to be possible. And everything was up in limbo. I was talking to a pastor friend of mine who had also been walking with people who have been in grief during these times. And he described the grief that people have been going through during these months as complicated grief. And those words, they struck a chord, they rang true for me. Because there is that level of grief, that sense of loss that you feel in these situations. But then there's an additional layer. Because it's not just the loss that you're feeling, there is an additional loss of all of your coping mechanisms. They're all gone. Everything that you knew is not an option. And so when this happens, you have to find your own path in figuring out how to deal with this. My father's service, it's currently planned for November 24th, 8 months after he has passed, 8 months before there's an official goodbye. And while my father's memorial service is still to come, you know, my soul couldn't wait that long. And I talked to my family and I said, I would love to be able to bury my dad's ashes, if that's okay. So in August, I went back to Garden City. And, you know, my dad, he was an interesting man with interesting interests. And he loved antiques and he loved to make ice cream, and he had ice cream every day. So we buried my dad's ashes in an antique ice cream maker, which he would have absolutely loved. And I wasn't planning on saying anything during this time, but the night before, I put a few words together. And I concluded those words, and it was just my son and my husband and my brother. But I concluded those words by saying that more than anything, we wanted him to find his rest, to be at peace, to be healed of every demon that haunted him. And that we know that his time spent here on earth is just a glimpse of what he's going to spend in eternity. Because heaven isn't a place for perfect people. It's a place where our broken souls can be made whole. So I told him to be made whole, Dad. And that's what my soul needed. And I bring you this story today because I know that I'm not the only one. Some of you may have been experiencing loss during this time. And I'm here to say I get it. It's messy. It's not easy. And I ask you just to give yourself an extra dose of grace. Find the ways that you can have a routine. Because, well, during this time, it's complicated.
Thank you, Janelle. And thank you for that very vulnerable speech. Sorry. I can get through this. I can do this. Thank you so much. Can we have a timer's report?